Assalamu alaikum, dear students. How are things with you? I'm okay. Because I received negative feedbacks about the sound effects of my first two video classes, I have decided to reconstruct both those classes all over again. Because I believe if you can't hear me clearly, you cannot learn anything from me. And if you can't learn anything from me, the purpose of this lesson fails and the effort becomes just waste of time and energy. So yes, I'm going to reconstruct both the classes all over again, and this time I'm using a device to improve the sound effect. So I hope you will hear everything clearly and you will learn what I intend to teach you. Okay, but before I start my lesson, I have to move out of your sight for the time being so that you can have a better view of the monitor and can see everything on the screen clearly and read the sentences written on the screen easily. Is that okay? Thank you. In this lesson, I will talk about this topic from your syllabus, voice change. And this item of grammar will always be in your syllabus in every class up to the higher secondary level. So you see how important this topic is, and I hope you understand how seriously you should try to learn about it. At the very outset of the lesson, I'd like to show you how you'll be benefited from this lesson. Okay, by the end of the lesson, you'll be able to identify active and passive sentences. You will know which sentences are active and which are passive. You will also be able to change assertive-affirmative sentences from active to passive, and you will be able to use passive sentences in the appropriate situations. You will know when and why you should use passive sentences. The first question that may come to your mind, dear students, is what is an active sentence like? What has it got? How do you know that a sentence is an active sentence? Good question. If we analyze an active sentence, we find three major characteristics in it. The first of which is that the agent is used as the subject of an active sentence. Now, what is an agent? Right. An agent is the person or the thing that does the action. So the person or the thing that does the action is known as an agent, and the agent is used as the subject of an active sentence. Okay, and that is the first characteristic of an active sentence. The next characteristic of an active sentence is that the verb of an active sentence changes its form depending on the number and person of the subject and also on the tense it is used in. For example, if the tense is present indefinite tense and the subject is a third person singular number, the verb takes s, es or is with it. So you see, the verb of an active sentence changes its form depending on the number and person of the subject and also on the tense it is used in. Okay, the next characteristic of an active sentence is that the person or the thing that is affected by the action is used as the object. Now, dear students, if you ever see any of these or all of these characteristics in a sentence, you can be 100% sure that the sentence is an active sentence. Now, let's see what a passive sentence is like. Dear students, unlike an active sentence, a passive sentence doesn't use the agent as its subject. Instead, the person or the thing that is affected by the action of the agent is used as the subject. So you see, the subject of a passive sentence doesn't do the action of the verb. In fact, it is the person or the thing that is affected by the action of the agent. And that is the first characteristic of a passive sentence. The second and the most important characteristic of a passive sentence is that the main verb of a passive sentence is always in the past participle form. There is no exception to it. The main verb of a passive sentence never changes its form. It is always in the past participle form. On top of that, a right form of the be verb is always used as an auxiliary for the past participle main verb. In fact, this combination, a right form of the be verb and the past participle form of the main verb, is the bottom line about a passive sentence, because there is not a single passive sentence in entire English language that doesn't have this combination. In other words, every single passive sentence in entire English language has this combination, be plus V3. Well, in informal spoken English, get is sometimes used instead of be, but that is only in informal spoken English. Other than that, it is always a right form of the be verb that is used as an auxiliary for the past participle main verb in a passive sentence. Okay, so that is the most striking feature of a passive sentence. Right, the last but not the least important characteristic of a passive sentence is that the agent is used as the object. The agent, which is the subject of a passive of an active sentence, is used as the object in a passive sentence. So, dear students, you see that the object of a passive sentence does the action. It is not the subject of a passive sentence that does the action of the verb. Right, so these are the three major characteristics of a passive sentence, and if you ever see any of these or all of these characteristics in a sentence, you can be sure that the sentence is a passive sentence. So I hope by now you can easily identify active and passive sentences. Now let's see how we can change an active sentence into passive. Okay, I will be using assertive sentences to begin with, and you know the assertive sentences are divided into two groups, affirmative and negative. I'll be using affirmative sentences in the present and past indefinite tenses first. I'll be using present and past indefinite tenses because both these tenses have got the same verb structures. An active sentence, either in the present or in the past indefinite tense, has a subject, which is the agent that does the action of the verb, and the verb of an active sentence always agrees with the number and person of this subject and also with the tense it is used in. After the verb comes the object, which is actually the person or the thing that is affected by the action of the agent. Now let's see how we can change this active verb structure into passive. The passive sentence must have a subject, which is always the object of the active sentence. Dear students, this is the first step you have to take to change any active sentence into passive. You have to use the object of the active voice as the subject of the passive sentence. After the subject of the passive sentence, you need a be verb in its right form, and after the be verb, this verb of the active voice is used in its past participle form in the passive voice. After the past participle main verb of the passive sentence, you have to use a preposition before you use the object, and the object of your passive voice is always the subject of the active voice. Well, dear students, these are the steps you always have to follow to change any active sentence into passive. The steps are, first of all, you have to use the object of the active voice as the subject of the passive voice. Then you have to use a be verb in its right form, and after that you have to use the main verb of the active sentence in its past participle form in the passive sentence. After the verb, you need to use a preposition, which is most commonly by, but there are some exceptions, and I'll be talking about those exceptions towards the end of my lesson. And after the preposition, you use the object of the passive sentence, and the object of the passive sentence is always the subject of the active sentence. So these are the steps you need to follow every time you change an active sentence into passive. Well, now let's see what are the forms of the be verb that we can use in a passive sentence. Right, the form of the be verb depends on the number and person of the subject and also on the tense it is used in. For example, in the present indefinite tense, the right form of the be verb must be either am or is or are, depending on the number and person of the subject. Similarly, in the past indefinite tense, the right form of the be verb must be either was or were, again depending on the number and person of the subject. Right, dear students, now let's use these verb structures to make examples. Right, in the present indefinite tense, an active sentence looks much like this. It's got a subject, a verb, and an object. Let's see what happens when we change this sentence into passive. By now, you have learned that the object of the active sentence becomes the subject of the passive sentence, and after the subject of the passive sentence, we need a be verb in its right form. And for a singular subject like this, third person singular subject like this, in the present indefinite tense, the right form of the be verb is always this one, is. After the right form of the be verb, you need the main verb of the active sentence in its past participle form. Okay, so after your work is over with the verb, you need this preposition before you use the object of your passive sentence, which is always the subject of the active sentence. So you see, following those basic steps, we can change this active sentence into passive. The basic steps are again using the object of the active sentence as the subject of the passive sentence. After the subject of the passive sentence, we use a be verb in its right form, and then we use the main verb of the active sentence in its past participle form. After that, we use a preposition and then the object of the passive sentence, which is always the subject of the active sentence. So in this way, we can change any active sentence into passive. Now you can ask me a question like, will there always be just a single word subject, a single word verb, and a single word object in the active sentence? The answer is no. There may be more words than just a subject, a verb, and an object in the active sentence. Here is an example with more words than just a subject, a verb, and an object. In this sentence, there is an introductory phrase before the subject, and again there is another phrase after the object. Now let's see how we can change this active sentence into passive. Alright, dear students, let me tell you that when we change an active sentence into passive, we work only with the subject, verb, and object of the active sentence, and we keep all other words and phrases of the active sentence as they are and where they are. The phrase at the beginning of the active sentence is used at the beginning of the passive sentence too. And after this introductory phrase of the passive sentence, you need the subject for your passive sentence, and you know that the subject of your passive sentence is always the object of the active sentence. Now, what is the object of this active sentence? Dear students, if you are ever confused about the object of the active sentence, if you have difficulty identifying the object of the active sentence, all you have to do is to ask the main verb of the active sentence a question with whom or what, and the answer you get is always the object of the active sentence, and you can use that object as the subject for your passive sentence. Now let's ask this main verb of the active sentence a question with whom or what, and let's see what happens. Jim waters what? The answer is obviously his flower plants. Now you see, every time you ask the main verb of the active sentence a question with whom or what, you get the object as the answer, and you use that object as the subject of your passive sentence. After the subject of your passive sentence, you need to use a be verb in its right form, and for a plural subject like this in the present indefinite tense, the right form of the be verb is always this one, are. And after the be verb, you have to use the main verb of the active sentence in its past participle form. So waters becomes watered in the past participle form. After the main verb of the passive sentence, you use a preposition and then you use the object of your passive sentence, which is always the subject of the active sentence. Well, your sentence is not complete yet because there is another phrase after the object of the active sentence. And what do you do with that passive? What do you do with that phrase? Okay, you just keep it as it is and where it is. The phrase after the object of the active sentence remains after the object of the passive sentence. Your passive sentence is now complete and it stands like, on Friday mornings his flower plants are watered by Jim as a pastime. Dear students, you can always use this by plus agent at the end of your passive sentence. There will be no grammar error, everything will be fine. And this sentence is also nice as it is, nothing wrong with it either. Okay, let's see another example in the past indefinite tense. In this sentence, we again have an introductory phrase before the subject, but this time we have an adverb after the subject and before the main verb. We have another phrase after the object also. Now let's see how we can change this sentence into passive. Okay, as a rule, we keep the phrase at the beginning of the active sentence at the beginning of the passive sentence. So last Friday becomes the introductory phrase for your passive sentence. And after the introductory phrase of your passive sentence, you need the subject, which is always the object of the active sentence. Now let's see what the object of this active sentence is. Let's ask this main verb of the active sentence a question with what? Jim accidentally broke what? The answer is a window pane. So you see, again, we asked the main verb a question with what, and we got the object as the answer. And now we use that object as the subject of the passive sentence. After the subject of the passive sentence, we need a be verb in its right form. And for a third person singular subject like this, in the past indefinite tense, the right form of the be verb must be this one, was. After this right form of the be verb, you cannot use the past participle form of the main verb straight away, because in the active sentence there is an adverb before the main verb. So you have to keep this adverb before the main verb of your passive sentence also. So okay, and you have to keep it as it is, no change at all. After the adverb, you use the main verb of the active sentence in its past participle form in the passive sentence. Broke is broken in the past participle form. So once your work with the main verb of the passive sentence is over, you use a preposition and then you use the object of your passive sentence, which is always the subject of the active sentence, which is actually the agent that does the action. Okay, now your sentence is not complete because you have to keep this phrase that is after the object of the active sentence, after the object of your passive sentence also. Now your sentence is complete. Okay, dear students, you see, every time you change an active sentence into passive, you have to work only with the subject, verb and object of the active sentence, and you have to keep all other words and phrases as they are and where they are. You cannot leave them out, you cannot change them at all. Right. Now, the final question that you can ask me is, why passive? why and when do the native English speakers use passive sentences? Very good question. The answer is the native English speakers use passive sentences in certain situations. The first of which is when they do not know who or what the agent is. Dear students, by now you have learned that in an active sentence, the agent is used as the subject. But when the native speakers do not know who or what the agent is, they cannot use active sentences. They have to use passive sentences. And this is the first situation for passive sentences. Okay. Next, when a speaker or a writer considers that the person or the thing that is affected by the action and the action itself are more important than the agent, the speaker or the writer can use a passive sentence. For example, at school, you find some money missing from your school bag. And during the tiffin break, you go to your class teacher to complain about it, and you tell your class teacher like, "Miss, some money has been stolen from my bag." Now, you use this passive sentence, "Some money has been stolen from my bag." You use this passive sentence because you do not know who has done the job, who the agent is. And because you do not know who the agent is, you use a passive sentence to complain to your teacher about your case. Now, in response, your teacher may say, "Well, don't worry, your case will be looked into. Your case will be investigated." Now, again, your teacher also uses a passive sentence because your teacher believes that your case, the missing money, and the action investigation are much more important to you than the person who will investigate into the matter, the agent. So, dear students, you see, you use a passive sentence when you do not know who the agent is who has done the job, and again you use a passive sentence when you consider that the person or the thing that is affected by the action and the action itself are more important than the agent. Okay, you use a passive sentence, and these are the two most common situations in which the native English speakers use passive sentences. Okay, next, a native English speaker or writer uses a passive sentence when the speaker or the writer believes that the reader or the listener very well knows who the agent is. For example, we can say that a new law will be passed in the parliament to curb corruption. Now, we can say this in the passive voice because everybody knows who passed a law in the parliament. It is obviously the government, the members of the parliament. Everybody knows this, and because everybody knows this, we can say it in the passive voice. We can use a passive voice. All right. Next, to talk about inventions and discoveries, native English speakers use both the active and passive sentences equally. For example, we can say Christopher Columbus discovered America. We can also say America was discovered by Christopher Columbus. Both sentences are absolutely fine, nothing wrong with either of them, and both of them are equally accepted by the native English speakers. Okay, similarly, to talk about literary works, we can use both active and passive sentences equally. For example, we can say William Shakespeare wrote Hamlet. We can also say Hamlet was written by William Shakespeare. Both sentences are absolutely fine, nothing wrong with any of them. Right, dear students? So these are the situations for which native English speakers, that means the people who speak English as their first language, use passive sentences. But unfortunately in our country, many teachers get the students to change any kind of or every kind of active sentences into passive, but that's not what the native English speakers do. The native English speakers are very selective about using passive sentences. In fact, they always prefer active sentences to passive sentences. They use a passive sentence only when it is unavoidable. Right. Now let's see what we have learned so far from this lesson. The first thing we have learned from this lesson is to identify active and passive sentences. By now, we can tell which sentences are active and which are passive. Then, we have learned that the object of an active sentence is used as the subject of the passive sentence. We have also learned that a right form of the be verb is always used as an auxiliary for the past participle main verb. The main verb in a passive sentence is always in the past participle form. It never changes its form. The form of the main verb in a passive sentence is fixed. It is always the past participle form. Okay. Next, we have learned that the agent is used as the object in a passive sentence and it is placed after a preposition. Then we have learned that while changing an active sentence into passive, we work only with the subject, verb and object of the active sentence, and we keep all other words and phrases unchanged in the passive sentence. We do not change or leave out any other words or phrases of an active sentence. We keep them all unchanged in the passive sentence. Okay, dear students, last of all, we learned the situations in which you can use passive sentences. So, dear students, that's all about changing assertive affirmative sentences in the present and past indefinite tenses from active to passive. Thanks for watching. In my next video lesson, I will repeat the second video lesson that I uploaded earlier, and it was about changing assertive negative sentences from active to passive. So long, dear students. Take care. Bye for now.